What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to talk about Battlefield 6 or Battlefield 2021, whatever you want to call it, and I just wanted to pretty much discuss what I want from the game when it comes out late next year. Obviously, Battlefield 5 has been one of the more controversial titles in the franchise, and as much as I love the game, in my opinion it's easily the worst Battlefield title that I've ever played, and it seems that the large majority of the community agrees. Ever since that very first reveal trailer, it's been full of controversy, issues, and despite overall being a pretty solid game, for a Battlefield game it unfortunately just never lived up to the expectations of what we all hope a Battlefield game will be. Because of this little speed bump, it seems DICE are pretty much all in on making Battlefield 6 the redeeming title of the franchise, having ended support early on Battlefield 5 and pulling a lot of the Battlefront 2 devs to start working on the game, which, like I said, is set to release late in 2021, likely around October or November, so it definitely seems like they're planning to turn things around with the new game, which I think is definitely needed for the future of the Battlefield franchise. So today we're just going to be covering some of the improvements that I would love to see in the next game, as well as touching mostly on the setting of the game too, as that is obviously such a huge part of the game. Personally, for me it boils down to 3 different settings that I would love to see them go for. A modern day shooter much the same as Battlefield 4, a Vietnam based game, or my personally most wanted game, Battlefield Bad Company 3. Now, technically Bad Company 3 and a modern day shooter could pretty much be the same thing. Bad Company 2 was essentially modern, at least for the majority of it anyway. So either of these are pretty realistic ideas of what we could get. However, a Battlefield Vietnam game is something that I don't really think I've heard too much about from the fanbase. Obviously, there already is Battlefield Vietnam from like 2004 or 2005, which I think was actually the second game in the franchise, and then there was also the Vietnam expansion for Bad Company 2, so it's not like this hasn't been done before, but that was almost 10 years ago now, and with how much the Frostbite engine has improved, it'd obviously just be a completely different experience. Personally, I would love to see a really gritty, brutal game set in Vietnam, because I think that would really suit the style of Battlefield in a way that just not many other shooters could really emulate. However, there is one big issue with just having a Vietnam game, and that is that it could get stale very quickly. A Vietnam based game would obviously mean that it all takes place in the one relatively small area, so even if there were 10 to 15 maps, they'd all look pretty much the same since it's all in the same country. For example, they'd all be somewhat jungle based maps, and even if you had some that were more out in the open or in airfields or whatever the case may be, it's still going to be a lot of green, grassy, tree-filled maps that, like I said, would just get stale fairly quickly. The great thing about not locking into one specific war like that is that you can mix urban maps, jungle maps, desert maps, snowy maps all into the same game, keeping everything nice and fresh. And honestly, you could have probably 2 maps in each of those settings for a total of 8 maps, and that would still probably be more refreshing than having twice as many maps but all in the same sort of setting. Because of that, I'm not really sure if a Vietnam based game would be the best idea, honestly. As much as I would love to play some Vietnam maps and have some of those early Black Hawks raining down fire on a battlefield in the rice fields or something like that, I just don't know if that's a viable option for an entire game. If they could somehow implement it into a game as DLC like they did with Bad Company 2, then that would be a great option, and honestly that just makes me want Bad Company 3 even more, because they could just do that as a bit of a throwback to Bad Company 2 in a way. If they came out with Bad Company 3 in a modern sort of setting, had heaps of different variety and just made the game really solid all around, then there's no reason they couldn't almost make it a new tradition that each Bad Company title has a Vietnam expansion a few years after launch. Personally, I would be really down for that, and honestly I think that's the best way to go about it if they were to ever do anything Vietnam related again. Now, as for the modern setting, whether it be Bad Company 3 or just essentially a follow-up to Battlefield 4, personally I'm not quite as drawn into that, as it just has been done to death at this point. Bad Company 2, Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline, Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3, and then obviously now the reboot of Modern Warfare. It's clearly just been done so much at this point, but I will say that it easily has the most potential whether I like that setting or not. The thing with having a game set in World War 1 or 2 or set in Vietnam for example is that you're extremely limited by what the technology was back in those days and how well that translates over to the game. Battlefield 1's biggest knock was that there was just a lack of weapons, that the weapons were all boring and mostly single shot or semi-automatic, and that the tanks and planes were also somewhat limited since obviously back in World War 1 the technology just wasn't close to where it is today. And even though I loved the setting of Battlefield 1, it did still affect that game having a limited firepower. Whether you like the modern type setting or not, it's undeniable that there is unlimited potential these days for weapons, gadgets, vehicles. There's just so much more they can do, and I feel like that allows a company like DICE to kind of get out of their comfort zone a little and try some new awesome things when it comes to implementing the latest warfare tech into the game. In Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 5, taking out tanks can sometimes be pretty hard. You're pretty limited in what you can use, but in Battlefield 4, it's not quite as hard to stand up somewhere high, lock onto the tank with a Javelin missile and take it out from behind cover, keeping the vehicle players on their toes and making vehicles much less of a dominant force compared to the previous two games. There's also the inclusion of choppers, which in my opinion are one of the best things in a Battlefield game. Getting in a chopper with 2 or 3 mates on the miniguns, trying to land on a building and clear it while they wipe out anyone nearby with RPGs or AA launchers. That kind of thing is what makes Battlefield such a great franchise, and honestly, not having choppers in the last few games has just been a massive bummer, coming from someone who generally doesn't really like vehicles. I definitely think that as much as I personally would love to see Vietnam or hell, even something completely different, a modern day setting is almost needed at this point just to give DICE the amount of content that they need and let them be a little bit more creative, because after the last 2 installments to the franchise, they're in desperate need of some of that Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4 magic. Let me know down in the comments what setting you guys would love to see for Battlefield 6. It's obviously very early to start guessing, but I'm sure we all have our own ideas and hopes for what the game might end up being. That is going to do it for this one though, guys. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.